What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Morgan Doobie Show. On today's episode, we're going to watch a portion of an Aaron Ra video so I can point out how embarrassingly wrong he is, why you should not learn the Bible from an atheist, and how I got ChatGPT to acknowledge the existence of God.
Boom.
It's one of my biggest pet peeves that atheists, particularly atheist YouTubers, think it's appropriate to teach the Bible when they've so clearly never read it, or perhaps they've skimmed through it and think that that makes them some sort of biblical expert. The Bible is not just one book. It is a compilation of 66 different books. God did not give us the Bible with chapters and verse numbers. Like David Pawson says, if he wanted us to read it that way, he would have given it to us that way, but he didn't. You have to read the Bible book by book, and you absolutely cannot conflate verses together like Aaron Ra does in this video. You can't just make up verses that aren't in the Bible and claim that they are. This is why I highly encourage you to not take YouTubers, particularly atheist YouTubers, word for it and do the research yourself. I don't even want you to take my word for it. I would love if you listen to what I say and it piques your interest enough to look up these things for yourself. That is something that these atheist YouTubers don't at all acknowledge. They are so highly arrogant. They present what they're speaking on as if it is factually sound, intellectually superior knowledge, when it is anything but.
You might be surprised to know that whenever I get criticisms, I always have to take into consideration that my critic may have a valid point. I mean, it's always possible. And if they do, it is incumbent upon me to own that as soon as possible. If I've made a mistake and I double down in defense of it, that's one of the things that I really hope, as I become an old man, I hope I don't go the way of so many other people that I once respected, who eventually get to a point where they say something dumb, and rather than take the learning experience, they instead double down on that, which only makes it worse. I mean, so if there's a possibility that I'm wrong, I'd rather own that as quickly as possible. However, in this case, I really don't think I'm guilty of anything that this critic is accusing me of. So the way that I see it here is that she's already like poisoned the well. That's the first logical fallacy we're starting with. She's poisoning the well that I can't ask another person if they're an atheist. I can't ask an atheist, hey, did I get this right or wrong? Because she said that any atheist, even atheist scholars, are by her definition not going to know the Bible because they're not believers somehow. So I've turned to Dan McClellan, who is a Bible scholar. Dan, it is very nice to meet you for the first time. I've seen so much of your work.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to meet you in person digitally.
In person digitally, we have a whole new context there. So I've been wanting to work with you on anything that we might be able to work on together. I find that I have very few problems with. Obviously, I have some differences of opinion regarding Christians, and you do identify as a Christian, yes?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. Would you mind? Could you give me a definition of what you think a Christian is?
Well, I tend to be loath to define things because as a cognitive linguist, I get frustrated with attempts to reduce conceptual categories down to necessary and sufficient features. However, I would say anybody who sincerely describes themselves or identifies as a follower of Jesus and as a Christian, I think ought to be considered a Christian. Now, there are fuzzy edges to a lot of identities. So I know there are people who will deny that I'm a Christian for a variety of reasons, but I identify as a Christian. I'm a person of faith, but at the same time, I am also a scholar, a critical scholar of the Bible, and I try to ensure that my faith is not influencing the perspectives that I maintain as a scholar, and think I'm pretty good at it.
I appreciate that very much, and I would agree with you about that general definition. Likewise, I've seen so many groups. I mean, like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics. You have huge swaths of Christianity that will be just dismissed by some other Christian group, usually Baptists. They'll say that these aren't Christian, they aren't Christian, they aren't Christian either. And the funny thing about that is that they don't realize that means that if all these other groups are not Christian, especially if the Catholics are not Christian, then do you realize that Christianity is no longer the world's leading religion? So what you describe as Christianity would actually be the fourth largest religion. That there are more Catholics than there are Christians, and there are more Hindus. I think it's true that there are more Hindus than there are Catholics. So that puts things into an interesting dynamic. That also means that you would have to admit that Islam is the world's dominant religion already.
Yeah.
So and then that's obviously a place that these people don't want to go. And I try to encourage Christians to be more inclusive. You are talking about, and this is probably a foolish thing for me as a non-believer to say, but that all these people who follow Christ, maybe you should ally together against me. I get that. Seriously, because it makes. I've seen how people in my own family would be ostracized or eliminated from Christianity, and all the people that I knew growing up, various groups for whatever reason would just be excluded by people who think, really, there's only 144,000 of you that are going to go to heaven, and everybody else is bound for hell. Seriously, but anyway, getting back to the point. Would you mind expanding a bit on what your scholarship is?
Sure. My PhD is in it's called Theology and Religion, and that's because that was the department at the University of Exeter that granted the degree. But my doctoral dissertation was in the cognitive science of religion and cognitive linguistics and the conceptualization of deity in the Hebrew Bible. And so my research uses critical biblical studies. There are a variety of different approaches within that, as well as the approaches of cognitive linguistics and the cognitive science of religion, to look at conceptualizations of deity, conceptualizations of scripture, and conceptualizations of religious identity. So I focus on a few different things using a few different methodological approaches. But then my public scholarship is a little more general. I try to be able to engage with pretty much anything that might come up related to misinformation about the academic study of the Bible, as well as about the academic study of religion.
So let's go ahead and watch a portion of this video, and I'll point out everything he gets wrong, and then we'll look at what the Bible actually says, and how ChatGPT even acknowledges how unbelievably fascinating this information is. It even acknowledges how it couldn't have been anything other than divine revelation.
I was always told that God is not a man that he should lie. And how do we know that? Well, because it's in a book or compilation of books that are purported to be the Word of God, even though everybody knows that every book of the Bible was written by men who lie.
Okay, circular reasoning right off the bat. And also, just because men can lie doesn't mean they were lying.
The Bible distinguishes that men lie and God does not. That's the difference between them. So if I go with that premise, then she accuses me of circular reasoning. But what would she have accused me of if I point out places in the Bible like Jeremiah 8:8, where the Bible admits that the scribes have written lies into the scriptures? Or what if I go to other places where God himself admits that he has introduced a lying spirit into the scribes, or he lies about having deceived someone? Where God lies and brags about it. What would she accuse me of then? I don't think, and I want to clarify this, and anybody who follows my channel certainly understands this. While I do have some differences with Christians, definitely, and with theists in general, my primary target are the biblical literalists, the Christian nationalists, the young earth creationists, geocentrists, flat earthers, all of that type of thing. So these are the people I'm addressing. And she doesn't seem to be aware of that. So she's just making accusations based, I think, on her own assumptions. I don't think that the Bible was written with the intent to be believed as deceptive. I think it was supposed to be interpreted as having like a fable with a moral, that these stories were supposed to have some cultural importance to them, but that they were never intended to be taken literally. And the problem that I have is that the people today, now, who do interpret the Bible literally are necessarily dishonest in their apologetics, trying to justify, Bronze Age or Iron Age interpretations with modern science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's. I furrowed my brow when I watched that part of the video because I don't know what the circular reasoning part is, because I thought your point was that humans are fallible. This is a product of human endeavor. Therefore, we cannot attribute infallibility to it. And I would agree with that. I don't think that you can. You have to acknowledge there's a possibility for human error, whether you think that extends all the way to the transmission of the manuscripts, or if that stops with the original composition and with the original autographs of the text. I don't think you can just flatly deny that there's human error in the text or in the composition. So yeah, there I didn't understand what the accusation was. And yeah, I've argued many times myself that there are parts of the Bible where God is represented as deceiving. And I think you hinted at 1 Kings 22 with Micaiah's prophecy to Ahab, where God asked for a volunteer who can go in. The word means basically tempt, or it could be understood as deceive Ahab to his death. And the Spirit, and the text translations usually overlook this, but the text says the Spirit came forward and said, I will go, I'll be a lying spirit in the mouths of their prophets, or in the prophets, these are Yahwistic prophets, and will tempt Ahab to his death. And God says, I love it, go do it. And Ahab is killed as a result. And so you have God just openly deceiving a human to their death. A friend of mine named John Anderson wrote a wonderful book about a decade ago called The Jacob and the Divine Trickster. And his argument was that throughout the Jacob cycle in the middle of Genesis, you have Jacob and God using deception in order to ensure the success of Jacob's family and lineage, so that God's promise to Abraham could be fulfilled. And he argues for a theology of deception that you can find in the Jacob cycle elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. And I would even suggest that the first lie in the Bible was told by God. When God tells Adam, on the day you eat of this fruit, you will die. Guess what? That doesn't happen. The not the overwhelming majority of scholars, but I think the majority of scholars recognize that whatever that threat was, it doesn't actually happen. Whether God changes their mind, whether God was just lying, it just doesn't happen. So even if we do try to attribute God's influence to every syllable of the Bible, that does not preclude the possibility of deception. And so I think there are a lot of Christian, Jewish, other scholars, non-believing scholars who can approach this text from a position that is more concerned for trying to be objective and see that, one, there aren't really grounds for saying if it's in the Bible, it's true. The data just don't support that at all. It has to be fallible. And there are problems throughout the text, and attempts to try to rehabilitate and try to salvage the infallibility, the inerrancy of these texts, and particularly the cosmology of someone like Job, just strike me as profoundly misguided, methodologically, logically, factually. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I had no problem with your argument, and was kind of surprised at a rather flippant dismissal, just saying, "Oh, circular reasoning, moving on," and I don't even understand how that argument works.
So what does that mean about God? Does God lie? God only knows, because All anyone knows about God is from a book written by men pretending to speak for God, a God who can never speak for himself.
So many logical fallacies.
Really? So many? How many? 0? I count 0. Because while I noticed that if you go through a list of logical fallacies online, just look up lists of logical fallacies, you might recognize that you've seen every one of them used as an argument for God. And I've noticed that every argument for God incorporates at least one logical fallacy. But I don't use logical fallacies. If there were more than 0 logical fallacies in the statement that you recorded that I just made, you would have listed what they are and shown that they are that. But you can't list them, you can't name them, you can't identify them. I didn't use any. You just want to pretend that I did. So how do we know that that's really what they're doing, that they're just pretending to speak for God? Well, let's look at the Book of Jōb, for example.
Yes, let's.
Therein, God says that the sea is shut up behind doors, and that the earth is a flat disk in the shape of clay when pressed by a seal, and that it has edges that you can grab and shake the evil off of it.
Okay, conflating a bunch of verses together there.
I would call that reading these verses in context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that as well, because one of the approaches that most believing Bible readers take is they assume what I call univocality, which is a fancy word for one voice, which basically means that every last syllable of the Bible comes from the same source, therefore speaks from a single unified consistent perspective, speaks with a single unified consistent voice. And this is what allows people to kind of triangulate a bunch of doctrines based on, a passage from John, a passage from Daniel, a passage from Genesis, and kind of bring it all together. So the notion that it is deceptive to mush a bunch of texts together is problematic for a person who asserts univocality to begin with. And my assumption is that that content creator would assert univocality. If they don't assert univocality, then they must agree that the texts can disagree with each other, that they can conflict, that there can be contradictions in the Bible. And honestly, I would be surprised if that content creator acknowledges there can be contradictions in the Bible. But also, they're within everything you quoted was within like the middle to the end of Job. And so it's largely agreed to be a single author presenting a more or less consistent perspective about cosmology. Now, I would agree that it is poetic and it is rhetorical, but that does not mean that we can't find a consistent cosmological perspective behind all those references. And when we look throughout the Hebrew Bible, we see a pretty consistent perspective that the earth is on a disk, that the dry land is in the center, it's surrounded by water, that there is a solid dome that encloses everything. Underneath, there are waters, subterranean waters in the earth. There are the pillars of the earth that reach down into the abyss. And then this is all floating in the middle of the waters above, the waters of the heavens, and the waters beneath. Just water just extends out. It's turtles of water all the way down, basically. And and you find that pretty consistently throughout the Hebrew Bible. And I think Job is a pretty fair representation of that cosmological model. And there are, little it too has fuzzy edges, and there are little variations here and there. And I think even within Job, there are some rhetorical flourishes here and there. But for the most part, I thought the cosmological model that you described fairly accurately represents what Job is saying, and also fairly accurately matches what we find in most of the rest of the Hebrew Bible. And Job was probably written in the Persian period. Shortly after that, in Greco-Roman period Judaism, that's when I think you start to adopt some more Greek philosophical cosmological models. And so, you see this in like the first Enoch. The Book of Luminaries talks a lot about the cosmos and how the sun travels on 6 paths that enter the firmament on one side and leave the firmament on the other. So it gets a little more technical and a little more complex once you get through the Greco-Roman period. But with Job, yeah, that's still a Pretty consistent cosmological model. If somebody just Googles Israelite cosmology or something like that, there are a bunch of images that are going to pop up that are drawings that basically show the earth surrounded by water with a big dome over it, with pillars reaching down into the abyss, and then the waters above, and then God sits above the waters. So that's something that you pretty consistently see. So I had no issue with the way you were representing Job's representation of the cosmology. But that content creator, I thought, was then trying to do two things at the same time. One said, hey, we can look at this one passage where Job says the earth floats over, I forget exactly what the word is, either the abyss or the void or something like that. And so
hangs upon nothing is what what he's referring to, isn't it?
Hangs upon nothing. I don't remember what the Hebrew says, but that's probably a good translation. And so tries to make the argument that, oh, that means Job knew what was going on, but then spends the rest of that segment arguing that we shouldn't take this to be an accurate representation of their cosmology. And so it's kind of arguing out of both sides of their mouths, saying, look, this one part is accurate, and so that means Job was inspired and knew about modern physics and astronomy, but everything else that disagrees with that, we dismiss that as not being a literal representation of their cosmology, but as just poetry that can be dismissed. And so it's a pretty standard apologetic approach, in my opinion. Whatever helps us, we're going to assert that that's literal. Whatever undermines our position, we're going to assert that that is figurative, that is poetic, that is not to be taken seriously. And so, yeah, pretty standard apologetic fare, and not very insightful.
I should have asked you when you said some period in which Job was written.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people still think that Job is the oldest book in the Bible. What year would you put for when Job was most likely written?
So I think Job was probably written somewhere in the 5th century BCE, so between 400 and 499 BCE-ish, somewhere around there.
That's post-exilic, is that?
Yeah, post-exilic. So the exile begins at the beginning of the 6th century, and then once we have Cyrus conquering Babylon in 539 BCE, that's the beginning of the period when the Judeans, the Judahites, are allowed to return. And so that would be the beginning of the post-exilic period. And so pretty much the entire 5th century is post-exilic. But in this period, there's a lot of contemplating the problem of evil. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? And really, Job is just kind of a narrative meditation on the problem of evil. And I think most scholars would agree that the little narrative framework that we have at the beginning of the end with Satan and the story of Job losing his family and then getting all his stuff back and getting new children to replace the old ones, all that's probably a separate composition. And that was added to the main chunk of Job, which is these dialogues with his friends. But yeah, they probably all come from the Persian period. They have some affinities with the Aramaic language. They're written in Hebrew, but it's very weird Hebrew. It's probably some of the weirdest Hebrew in the Hebrew Bible. And some people think, oh, that must mean it's really, really early. And the reality is it's probably because it has a little more to do with Aramaic. And there probably is a foreignizing intent. The author is probably trying to make it sound a little weird to give it that sense of time far, far away, or time long, long ago in a place far, far away. So they're making it sound a little weird, but yeah, the notion that it's one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible isn't really supported by much data. I don't know many scholars who would agree with that.
And God says he laid a foundation for the earth and he erected pillars on it, and then he took the earth, presumably by the edges, and then sat atop those pillars.
Doesn't say anything about God erecting pillars and sitting on them at all. It does not say that.
I didn't say that God sits on pillars. Mm-hmm. I said that the Bible says that God set the earth upon pillars, specifically in 1 Samuel 2:8. Now, realize that's not Job, but I've got references from all over the Bible where the Bible talks about the shape and condition of the firmament, and one place, it says it hangs up the earth upon nothing, and somewhere else it says it's set upon pillars so that it will not move. Yeah. What do the pillars go on? Who knows? Are the pillars set upon nothing? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the idea there, and there are two places in Job. We have Job 9:6. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. And we have Job 26:11. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke. And this is kind of an architectural conceptualization of the cosmos, where both the earth and the heavens are being held up by some kind of solid objects, pillars. And there are also references to the foundations of the earth. And I think this is one of the things that you see pretty consistently throughout the Hebrew Bible, the notion that under the earth, there are pillars that just extend down beyond the scope of our cognition, of our awareness, into something. It's kind of like our concept of eternity. Today, we have a more kind of philosophically, scientifically informed notion of eternity as something that never ends. But anciently, olam, the Hebrew word for eternity, just meant whatever is outside our capacity to view or to think about. So it was just whatever extends beyond the scope of our perspective. And so I think the pillars of the earth, the pillars of the heavens, were thought to just extend down beyond our capacity to perceive into whatever. But yeah, absolutely, the Hebrew, one of the most consistent features of ancient Israelite and Judahite and even Judean cosmology was the notion that the earth sits on some kinds of pillars that extend down into the abyss or whatever, beyond our capacity to perceive.
My interpretation of that was that it describes the earth as being a flat disk erected on pillars and then covered over the dome, like where the earth is more or less a map. And where one translation will say corners, another a better interpretation or translation would be quadrants, so north, south, east, and west. So we have a flat map divided into 4 sections, set on a table essentially, with this dome over it, which is watertight, except for the windows that let the rain in. And then all of that is like a reverse snow globe, an air bubble in a vast abyss, oceanic abyss.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the creation accounts describe. Genesis 1, you have the waters that are there from the beginning. There's no creation ex nihilo. They're there, and the earth is submerged in the water. It's just kind of chaotic matter there. And then the first thing that you do after you create light and dark is you create the waters above and the waters below. And what that means is creating that little air bubble through the construction of this firmament, this dome. Rakia in Hebrew means to hammer out. And so it's like a solid crystalline dome. And that allows you to separate out the waters and create this pocket. And then the third thing that happens, day 3, is the waters recede and you get the dry land. And this is something that you find in Job and you find in the Psalms and elsewhere, this idea that God had to either do battle with chaotic sea monsters like the Leviathan or Rahab or something like that, or had to push back the seas, or just commanded the seas to recede so that the dry land could appear. But yeah, everything beyond that is just the chaotic waters of creation. So I think that is a pretty consistent, pretty accurate representation of how the cosmos are described throughout the Hebrew Bible. And Job is one of the probably refers as repeatedly, if not more so, to this model of the cosmos than any other author I can think of in the Hebrew Bible.
On the notion of God fighting back the waters and all like that, I mean, there's shades of that in like the Enuma Elish and a couple of older myths. Do you see a relation that? Do you see like a direct influence from elder Mesopotamian mythology into Genesis?
I think there's definitely a genetic relationship. It's not so much that they're borrowing as they're kind of disagreeing. So similar to the way that when you had, when we have the scientific revolution and it starts to kind of undermine the claims of a lot of conservative Christians, particularly when it came to things like evolution in the 19th century and in the 20th century. In order to fight back, a lot of conservative folks had to kind of adopt the methodologies and the frameworks of the opponent so that they could make their argument sound like it was engaging them on their own terms. And I think this is probably what's going on to some degree. There are scholars who think it's a little more prominent there are scholars who think it's a little less prominent, this Chaos Kampf idea that creation was a product of a battle against the monsters of chaos. So David Sumora is one who would argue that we don't really see that in, for instance, Genesis 1. But there's very clearly links between the Enuma Elish and what we see in Genesis 1, even though they're kind of obscured and they're under the surface and they're pretty toned down. So like Tiamat is the chaos monster that Marduk defeats in the Enuma Elish. And Tiamat's body is split in two. And one half of the body is the heavens, the other half of the body is the earth. That is an Akkadian name, Tiamat. In Hebrew, you have the word Tehom, which is the word for the abyss. And that is the watery, chaotic waters of creation. And those are what are split to create the waters above and the waters beneath. So I think there are some points of contact, but there's let me see if I can pull it up real quick, but there's a story about the storm god battling this chaos monster. So in Ugaritic literature, you have Baal, who battles Yam, which battles Nahar, battles other deities who are associated with the rivers, the seas, chaos. And this is one of the creation accounts that we find elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, scattered around and adopted for other purposes. And there's a wonderful book that was published in 2020 by a scholar named Noga Ayali Darshan, called The Storm God and the Sea. And they go through and show where we see the fragments of this creation myth, which has to do with Leviathan, it has to do with Rahab, it has to do with the sea, and shows that there's probably a trajectory of development where it begins as this adopted creation account, where we did battle with these monsters, and that allowed us to impose order and create, allowed the dry land to appear, allowed civilization to flourish. But then it becomes more of a story about God's salvation, that God delivered people, saved people. And so it becomes a story of an example of God's salvific power. And so when you get to like Psalm 74, it talks about our king is of old, saving people in the earth when you broke the heads of Leviathan and all this kind of stuff. So you see kind of a conceptual development of the way this story is understood and the way this story is deployed literarily. But probably
Leviathan is also Tiamat.
Leviathan is probably a Northwest Semitic representation of personification of the waters of chaos. Tiamat is a more direct East Semitic Akkadian representation. But I think you have, in the Hebrew Bible, you have some traditions that are being drawn from Akkadian, particularly in the exilic and the post-exilic literature. But I think some of the earlier stuff is being drawn more directly from like the Ugaritic literature. And so you have different kinds of influences. And so the folks who are adopting the Akkadian traditions, their scriptural heritage includes stuff that's probably more closely related to Ugaritic traditions. And so sometimes they all kind of get mixed together, and you get that mix of Plato that looks more brown than anything else. But that's kind of what comes out in some of the later representations in the Hebrew Bible. But yeah, I think they're drawing from different kind of conceptual matrices about the same idea, that there is chaotic water, and imposing order upon that chaos was the means of creation and allowing civilization to flourish and people to populate the earth.
And God also says that the sun will not rise unless he commands it to, because God doesn't know what the sun is, nor where it is, nor how big it is.
Nope, doesn't say that either.
The Bible does describe the sun as if it's both the same size as the moon, that both the sun and the moon are smaller than the earth, yet bigger than all the stars, because whatever person, whatever mere fallible human being is writing God's script here, doesn't know that the sun is itself a star, that the stars are all like our sun and many of them are bigger. They don't understand that the sun is bigger than the earth. You know, whoever's writing God's script thought that the sun went around the earth within a firmament above the earth.
Yeah, and I think this is another example of gatekeeping, asserting the right to interpret the text and denying it to everybody else, because those exact words are not in the Bible, but the words that are in the Bible indicate that they held a specific belief. And everybody who says the Bible says X or the Bible says Y is interpreting the text. So the notion that the Bible only says what the words actually say themselves, nobody actually sticks to that. Everybody wants to reserve for themselves the right to interpret the text, and this content creator was trying to deny that right to others. But yeah, from the perspective of the earth, an eclipse perfectly covers up the sun. Like the moon and the sun are the exact same size in that. And the creation account in Genesis 1 just says the greater lights to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And the idea there is not smaller or bigger. The idea is which is brighter and which has more illumination capacity. So yeah, if you want to say the Bible doesn't literally say that in those words, sure, but then you're limiting what you can actually. You're saying you're not allowed to interpret the text, but nobody sticks to that. But do the biblical text reflect that worldview, that cosmological model? Absolutely, they do.
Nor does he know the true shape of the earth either. He doesn't know that he's got everything round backwards, that the earth goes around the sun and not the other way around.
The Bible definitely, I think it's in Isaiah, mentions the sphericity of the earth. It doesn't say it's a sphere, but it definitely makes reference to it being a circle. And you have to keep in mind that this was during a time period where most cultures believed the earth was either flat or they believed that it was propped up on top of something. Like the Chinese thought it was propped up on the back of a tortoise. So for the Bible to make reference to the earth being suspended in the air and being the shape of a circle is pretty advanced for its time.
The Jews believed that the earth was flat and propped up on pillars. Isaiah 40 specifically mentions the circle of the earth. And by the way, the word used, while it is not the word for sphere, it is the word for circle, meaning that it is a disc and not a ball. More importantly, the word used, the word translated there, more probably means whole. So God sits above the whole of the earth. So in that passage is not, it got the shape wrong if it was talking about the shape at all, but it was not actually talking about the shape anyway.
Yeah, I think you have, so the word there is chug, chet vav gimel, and it's used to describe the drawing of a circle, which probably reflects the idea of using a compass to inscribe a circle. But you also have the idea of the circle of the sea. So
now, doesn't the application of the word compass, because that was one of the translations that I read, and I took that to mean what the compass of something is also the whole of it, as I understand it.
Oh, like
so
the
if
entirety.
You're drawing the circle, you're drawing the whole thing within that circle. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
I think it is used in context where that's what the context indicates. I don't think just lexically that you would define the term that way or gloss the term that way. But let me look and see if I can find. So we've got I think we only have 3 occurrences in the whole Hebrew Bible of Isaiah 40:22. It looks like Proverbs 8:27 uses it as well. Let me see. Yeah, he drew a circle upon the face of the abyss, the tehom. So, and that would support the idea that the seas are a circle around the circle of the earth. So surrounding the circle of the earth. There's Job 22:14 also uses the word. And the chug of the shemaim, the circle of the heavens, he walks around on. So you've got circle of heaven, and that could be understood as a dome, but it's usually, I think, based on my understanding, and I haven't done a word study or anything like that on this, the idea is to delineate. There's a delineation around something that is circular. And yeah, I think this just fits into the idea that the Earth is a circular disc, and then there is a circular ring of water around it, and then the firmament is what encapsulates all of that. So the notion that that represents a sphere isn't supported by any data whatsoever. That's reading something into the text that is not there, obviously for the purpose of trying to appropriate the authority of the Bible to serve their own interests. But the fact that the same word is used to describe the seas, I think, pretty firmly demonstrates that this is conceptualizing everything as a single plane, a single surface that has a circle upon it.
I mean, you have to remember that all of these statements are metaphors. The Book of Jōb is a poetry book.
This isn't just some Bronze Age moron raving about what he thinks the voices in his head are trying to tell him. No. We are expected to believe that this is God speaking directly to Job in person.
I can't wait to look at what God actually says to Job in these verses.
Albeit disguised as a whirlwind. Because remember that people back then didn't know that air was particulate matter. They thought that air was a supernatural spirit that gave us the breath of life. And when things moved because of the wind or whatever, whether they're clouds or a whirlwind or what have you, then they thought all of that was supernatural and an animating spiritual life force. You really should read the Book of Job. And God says some really stupid things in that book.
You really should read the Book of Jōb.
I made a video wherein I read directly from the Book of Job, specifically to illustrate to biblical literalists that this can only be poetic, the words of men, not the infallible word of God, because the statements made therein were believed at that time, but are now known to be false. And I'll include a video, or I'll include a link to that video below.
Yeah, that's another instance. That's an accusation that gets thrown at me an awful lot. People will be like, well, you've never read the Bible. It's like, I've translated large chunks of the Bible. I've read every single word of the Bible. I've read many books in 3 or 4 different languages. I worked for a decade as a scripture translation supervisor. That's just it's kind of cheap rhetoric. It's low-hanging fruit to just say, oh, you've never read it. Just because it represents an interpretation, a framework that is foreign, is alien to that other person. But yeah, and this is something that I came away from that video thinking of. A lot of the people I know, not scholars, but casual readers of the Bible or interested readers of the Bible, the ones who have read it the most and the most thoughtfully are frequently non-believers, whether lifetime non-believers or people who found their way out of church membership or believing because they were reading the text and because they were asking tough questions of the text and because they didn't find answers in the text, and yet they will still go back to the text and read it. And I think there's value in reading the text as a believer or a non-believer, not necessarily to find any kind of divine guidance, but to understand better what I think is the single most influential text that has ever existed. So that criticism is so cheap. It's such low-hanging fruit that I think it's just kind of a cheap swipe at someone. It's ad hominem. It's an attempt to try to get other folks who already agree with that person to cheer, because I think what it's doing is identifying you as a member of the out group, and then in the direction of members of the in group going, ha ha ha, look at that loser, probably has never even read the text. And the way that I talk about the Raiders, I assume everybody else out there is a Broncos fan, and so we go, ha ha ha, look at those losers. But I'm being facetious when I do that. But when it comes to trying to gain a following on social media, particularly on YouTube, you generally are going to, or generally people will lean into trying to pump up the in group and trying to denigrate and demean and debase the out group. And I think that's all that is.
I have to agree with you because I've heard very similar statements from Francesca Stavrakopoulou and from my friend Lawrence Yufa,
Mhm.
that they both find the Bible fascinating from an anthropological, archaeological standpoint, as in terms of literature or what have you. They both call it fascinating reading, and I get what they're getting out of it. And both of them are atheists.
Mhm.
So thank you for making that. Now, seriously, every argument is so bad and so dumb, they could only be the words of mere fallible men who didn't know anything about the world around them, pretending to speak for God.
Okay, so first off, I cannot believe he is judging metaphors literally and then pretending like God is stupid. That just makes you look stupid. It is so clear he's never actually even read the Book of Jōb. Otherwise, he would have a much better understanding of what he's talking about. This just shows Mr. Ra's personal bias, because you wouldn't take any other book of poetry. For example, I'm a huge Edgar Allan Poe fan. He's one of my favorite poets, one of my favorite writers. You wouldn't take a verse out of one of his writings, a metaphor, a poetic verse, and judge it literally and then claim it's stupid. It's like going to see Star Wars and complaining afterwards, like, we can't fly at light speed. Those physics aren't right. Well, yeah, it's a sci-fi movie. The Book of Jōb is a poetry book.
Which proves my point that it cannot be interpreted literally because these are not God's actual words. And remember that I'm arguing against biblical literalists. I'm not arguing against people like yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the inconsistent approaches that people take. They will say, "Oh, the Psalms are poetry. You can't really derive doctrine from poetry," and then they'll go and they'll assert that, "Oh, we have this one passage in the Psalms, therefore that's doctrine." And yeah, Job is poetic. It's rhetorical. It is figurative, but it also pretty consistently represents this cosmological outlook. Now, it talks about God, stretching out the heavens and laying the foundations and all this, and so it's conceptualizing where everything came from as if God was this general contractor who was going out and doing all this stuff. And and I don't think they actually thought of the creation of the universe in those terms. But the end product is still, that's how we get our cosmos as we understand them today. And all indications point in the direction of their understanding that the earth was flat, it was circular, there was a solid dome holding up the waters above, and so on. So there are generations of scholars who have approached the text as poetry, as rhetoric, as these things, but have still arrived at the conclusion that we can reconstruct Job's idea of the cosmos in a rough outline based on what he's saying there. And it certainly doesn't support a modern scientific view.
But let's go ahead and look at what these verses actually say, because even ChatGPT acknowledged that this must have been divine revelation. The statements made are statements that the ancients couldn't possibly have known. So months ago, I used ChatGPT to analyze God speaking to Job verse by verse to see what it had to say. I'm going to share with you some of the verses that Aaron Ra tried to speak about. So I'll read the verse first, and then after the verse, I'll read what ChatGPT says as its explanation for what the verse is talking about. Job 38:4. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. God challenges Job by asking about the creation of the earth, a foundational event of creation that predates human existence, emphasizing Job's lack of first-hand knowledge or understanding. Job 38:5. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? This verse continues the challenge, asking rhetorically about the measurements and planning involved in creating the earth, further illustrating the precision and intentionality of divine creation. Job 38:6. On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone? God questions Job about the earth's foundations, using architectural imagery to depict the earth's creation as a carefully constructed edifice, highlighting the depth of consideration and power involved. Job 38:7. While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. This verse adds a cosmic and celebratory dimension to the creation narrative, suggesting a universe alive with wonder and joy at the moment of creation, with celestial beings participating in the celebration. Summary. These verses begin a comprehensive exploration of various elements of the natural world, from the foundations of the earth to the behavior of the sea, the workings of the cosmos, and the habits of animals. Through this exploration, God emphasizes not only the complexity and majesty of creation, but also the care, wisdom, and power that underpin it. The rhetorical questions serve to humble Job and the readers, drawing attention to the vast gap between divine knowledge and human understanding. These are also some of the verses that Mr. Ra conflates and includes in his little spiel. Job 38:8. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? This verse speaks to the creation of the sea, personifying it as emerging from a womb, and God setting its boundaries as if closing doors, suggesting control over the sea's power and extent. Job 38:9. When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. Here, God describes the creation of the sea's atmosphere, using imagery of clothing and darkness to depict the sea's enveloping conditions, indicating a level of detail and care in creation. Job 38:10. When I fixed limits for it and set its bars and doors. God emphasizes the setting of boundaries for the sea, preventing it from engulfing the earth. This knowledge of establishing physical limits demonstrates control over the natural world structure and behavior. Job 38:11. And said, This far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. This verse further underscores the idea of God imposing restrictions on the sea, illustrating a command over the forces of nature that would be beyond human capability, reflecting knowledge and power that affirm divine authority over creation. Let's read just a few more verses that Mr. Ra mentions in his video. Job 38:12. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? This question to Job underscores the divine control over time and the natural order, specifically the transition from night to day, which is beyond human capability to command. Job 38:13. That it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it. Here, the imagery of dawn taking the earth by the edges and effecting change upon it suggests a divine perspective on justice and the moral order of the world, again highlighting knowledge and power uniquely attributed to God. The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. This verse describes the formation and distinct features of the earth in a way that suggests a craftsman's precision akin to sealing clay or designing a garment, emphasizing a purposeful design in creation. Job 38:15. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. This passage speaks to the outcomes for the wicked, implying a divine role in justice and the outcomes of human actions, which reflects a level of control and governance over moral order. Summary. These verses continue to showcase God's unparalleled knowledge and authority over the creation and operation of the natural world, including phenomena like the dawn and the moral order, which are presented as directly governed by divine will. The use of poetic imagery emphasizes the complexity, beauty, and order of creation, all of which point to insights and powers attributed to God alone. So look, I used ChatGPT so I could show you that this isn't just a matter of his opinion versus my opinion. It is literally a matter of his opinion versus the truth versus the facts. You can't just make a video and lie about things that aren't even in the Bible to make a stupid argument that could very well influence people and prevent them from ever learning the truth.
My argument against biblical literalism was not stupid,
No.
and I don't lie. because that's the only difference I see between myself and the biblical literalists. I see the creationists, the young Earth creationists, the flat earthers, all of these sort of extremists. I see them as in different stages of reality denial. There is no actual factual evidence in support of their position whatsoever. There's no logically valid arguments in support of their position. And everything that they use as an argument against my own position always assumes some sort of logical fallacy in play. All of their syllogisms have either premises that are not necessarily true, or their conclusions are non sequiturs, or both. And this applies even to the best arguments that some of them make. But for the biblical literalists, their position is to lie. Creationism, flat out. Absolutely every single thing creationism claims is a lie. And so the only difference, the only justification I have in being opposed to them is that I don't lie, that I care what the truth is. But believers always want to accuse me of being the one that is the liar.
Yeah.
That's irritating to me.
I get accused of lying all the time as well. If it's not that I hate the Bible and hate God and I'm attacking the Bible and or attacking God, it's that I'm lying, or I'm a tool of Satan or something like that. And I can imagine that atheists get that in even more emphatically and vociferously. And the accusation of lying is, again, I think pretty cheap rhetoric. I think it's pretty low hanging fruit. But she's got absolutely no basis on which to hang that accusation, apart from interpretive disagreements. Usually that's what that accusation really comes down to. This person interprets this text different from the way I interpret it, therefore they're lying. And I so rarely use that accusation, because I think I'm willing to extend an awful lot of grace to people and think that they believe that their interpretation is accurate. They believe that they're doing what they think is best, and they're probably willing to overlook a lot of that cognitive dissonance and just kind of lean into, well, this has to be the truth. But yeah, I didn't see anything in your video that could plausibly be argued to be a lie according to any mainstream conceptualization of what a lie is. It was just differences of interpretive opinion, and I think your interpretation was far more grounded in the data than theirs. I thought that her interpretations leaned into there are three dogmas that I think are like the three main pillars of people who claim to be biblical literalists. I don't think biblical literalists actually exist. I think they are ideological literalists, because they will make the text as figurative as it has to be in order to support their ideologies and their dogmas. But the instant you say, hey, look at Exodus 22:29, it commands everybody to sacrifice their firstborn child. Look at Psalm 82. God stood in the council of the gods. Look at 2 Kings 3:27, where Adonai's Judahite, Edomite, Israelite coalition that tried to go in and punish Moab got run off by Chemosh, the patron deity of Moab. As soon as you point to those texts that undermine their ideologies, suddenly everything is as figurative as hell. Like the literalness goes out the window. And so I personally don't think there are biblical literalists, but because of these three dogmas, inspiration, inerrancy, and univocality, they have to hold up this idea of literalism in order for the Bible to be the authority that they want it to be, because they want to leverage the authority of the Bible over anything else. They want to leverage the authority of the Bible so that they can claim to have, sobresaliente is not a word in English, right? Pretty sure it's not. That transcendent authority, because it's all about structuring power. It's all about trying to say who's in charge and trying to dismiss other claims to authority. And I think dismissing your perspective as a lie is another way that they can make the in-group cheer while demeaning the out-group. But it felt kind of like throwing spaghetti against a wall. It's like, we're going to try all the lowest hanging fruit to dismiss your argument. We're going to throw it against the wall, even though it all doesn't work together. We just want something to stick. And for some in my audience, maybe the lie accusation will stick. For others in my audience, maybe the you've never read it before argument will stick. For others in the audience, oh, it is circular reasoning fallacy. Maybe that's what's going to stick. I think it's just a grab bag of accusations. And I thought it was pretty poorly executed. And it was nothing but assertions. There was no backing up of the assertions. There was no substantiation. There was no, let's go look into the text and see what it actually says, until she got to the end and was basically like, Chat GPT says I'm right. So even there, the interpretation of what Chat GPT was saying was pretty flawed.
I'm going to let her explain that, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Okay.
This is why it is so important for you to do your own research. Look up for yourself what these atheist YouTubers tell you, what I tell you, what anyone tells you on the internet. The craziest part of this whole thing is, despite the fact that these are metaphorical, poetic statements, they're highly accurate statements. The last thing I want to show you is a speech that J. Warner Wallace did of all of the incredibly accurate scientific statements found within the Book of Jōb, things that the ancients couldn't possibly have known, and so it clearly came from God himself. Just listen to what he says, and you tell me what you think.
Canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades? God is kind of looking at Jōb and saying, hey, Jōb, you think you're so good? You think you can keep this constellation together? You think you can keep Pleiades together? I can keep Pleiades together. Okay. What's he trying to get at here? Well, now we know what Pleiades really is. It looks like 7 stars, but they aren't really 7 stars. They're 7 clusters of stars. There are 250 suns in those 7 clusters. But they look like one star because they're so tightly clustered together. And as it turns out, they're all moving in the same direction. So they'll always look this way. Isabel Lewis was the United States Naval Observatory astronomer, and she wrote, astronomers have identified 250 stars as actual members of this group, all sharing a common motion and drifting through space in the same direction. Lewis says they are, quote, journeying onward together through the immensity of space, unquote. God can keep this together, and it will be together from our perspective. But how would Jōb know that? You think this constellation looked anything different in the entire history of Judaism than Orion? That hasn't changed. You can still look in the nighttime sky and see Orion. How would Jōb know that this is stay together? This will stay together no matter what. Now, do you think you can loosen the bands of Orion? The band of Orion is this belt, and it's made up of 3 stars, Mintaka, Alnilam, and Anatak. It's almost like God is saying, hey, Jōb, you think you're this good? You can loosen these bands? I can loosen them. And sure enough, this is a very different situation than Pleiades. Garrett Serviss is a famous astronomer, wrote a book called Curiosities in the Sky. He wrote, today this band consists of an almost perfectly straight line of second magnitude stars that are equally spaced and very beautiful. In the course of time, however, the 2 right-hand stars, Mintaka and Alnilam, will approach each other and form a naked eye double. So in essence, these 2 stars on the right are eventually going to move together and they will form a naked eye double. The other star will drift away eastward so that the band will no longer exist. Unlike Pleiades, from Job's perspective, God can loosen this band. But how would Jōb know? What about Arcturus, though? Can you guide Arcturus in the suns? Do you think you can guide Arcturus anywhere you want? Garrett Serviss again wrote that Arcturus is one of the greatest suns in the universe, is a runaway star whose speed of flight is about 257 miles per second. It is massive. And it happens to be so massive that it is not affected by other gravitational objects. It's like a bull in a china shop. It goes wherever it wants to go. And it's huge and it's fast. It's traveling a lot faster than, say, our sun. This is a fast, heavy star that Charles Buckhalter of the Chabot Observatory, he wrote a book called Wonder Worlds. He says Arcturus's high velocity places that in a very small class of stars that apparently are a law unto themselves. The study of the Book of Jōb, in its comparison with the latest scientific discoveries, has brought me to the matured conviction that the Bible is an inspired book and was written by the one who made the stars.
Isn't that amazing? I had never heard that until like 6 months ago when I first watched this video, and I was just blown away. So what I did was I plugged this all into ChatGPT. I first wanted it to verify the statements made in the Book of Jōb regarding the Pleiades, Orion, and Arcturus. Then I wanted to verify the accuracy of the modern scientific knowledge that we now know about these constellations. Then I had it list all of the possible ways that Job could have known this information. And ChatGPT itself acknowledged that the only possible way Job could have known these statements, could have written these statements down thousands of years before we discovered these statements to be so accurate, was through divine revelation. God truly did speak to Job, and Job faithfully recorded what he said. So for anybody who claims that God didn't leave us any proof of his existence, I'm sorry, but you're just wrong. He left us so much proof. It's up to you to find it.
So she refers to the old belief in astrological constellations as if that was beyond the knowledge of primitive people. As if what we've learned about one of the stars in those constellations was detailed in the Bible. And I don't know how many Muslims you've ever talked to, but this is an apologetic that I get from Muslims a lot. Well, we've recently discovered some new thing, and we can retrofit what the Quran says to maybe go along with that if we just like really inventively interpret that, and therefore miracle of the Quran. That's the kind of apologetic. This is how I'm reading this.
Yeah, I think there's, in fact, I've run across one of those. Somebody was like, there's a passage in the Quran, there's a surah where it says that God is stretching out the heavens. And they're like, and you can interpret it iteratively. God is continuously stretching out the heavens. Therefore, they knew that the universe is continuing to expand. And yeah, I think it's a pretty silly attempt to read scientific knowledge into passing rhetoric, which
when we know that we know how that would have been understood in the 1400s. Nobody then is going to think about cosmic inflation, where it's not that the objects are moving apart from each other, but that the space between the objects is actually stretching, which is kind of taking the objects with it. It's a difficult concept. Nobody back then would have interpreted it this way. They all would have thought that God is hammering out the firmament, which is the dome over the earth. That's how they would have interpreted this. So God wrote the Quran and the Bible to fit with that interpretation.
Yeah. And I think the argument that there's no possible way they could have known this. Okay, that would be true if we had to understand these statements about the Pleiades and about these other constellations as explicit declarations that these stars are going to be stuck in the same positions indefinitely, or that the stars of Orion's belt are drifting. But and you raise a great point. Would they have understood it that way anciently, or would they have understood it in a different way? Just the surface level meaning. Were they just trying to say, "Hey, look at the constellations. Did you put those where they are? Do you keep them where they are? Can you take them apart?"
The sky.
Yeah. I was like, that's how they would have understood them. And to say, well, no, we can read the scientific knowledge into that statement. Like, yeah, if you want to, you can read it into it. But the argument that that's what it was intended to communicate is one that I think that's a bridge too far for any of them. That's not an argument you can make. That's just something you can decide to believe. And that's what dogmas are. They're things that aren't supported by the data, but that you decide to believe anyway. And so I think dogmas they're not admissible in any of these kinds of arguments because you can't support them. You can't make the case for them. They're just things that you just decide to accept or not to accept. So whether you call it Occam's razor or the law of parsimony or whatever, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. And the simplest explanation here is just that, hey, they use the constellations as a means of saying you're just a human. You can't do a whole lot. In the New Testament, you have that. Can you make a hair on your head white or black? Can you do any of these things? No, of course not. It's just an illustration of how comparatively powerless humans are to deities as they understood them. And that's the simplest explanation. The notion that they were like God inspired them to say this because he wanted to smuggle in this scientific knowledge that would be discovered thousands of years later.
Instead of giving us the scientific understanding in a way that we would have understood it and could have used that information.
Yeah, as if God is just going, "Ooh, I'm going to have him say this," and nobody will understand this for thousands of years. But one day somebody's going to be like, "Oh, that's cool," and then
miracle
jackpot.
of the Quran.
Yeah. So I don't think that argument means much at all. It's creative. I mean, there are people all over the place who are trying to look for connections like this. But if we look at all the comments about constellations in the Bible, like you stumble across some things that happen to kind of overlap if you squint hard enough at them for the edges to blur. But the overwhelming majority of the other details are all going to completely conflict. So that's another kind of standard fare of apologetics, to highlight the minority of cases where you can squint until the edges blur together, and to entirely ignore the overwhelming majority where there's no relationship whatsoever.
For anyone in my audience who is not familiar with Dan McClellan, I will put his channel and any other links down there. This is probably the only time that I recommend a Christian channel, but I do sincerely recommend this one.
I usually don't identify my channel as a Christian channel. I usually say it's a scholarly channel run by somebody who happens to be a Christian. But and a lot of people will deny me even that. But thank you. I appreciate that.